Well, welcome back to another episode of Leaving a Rich Legacy. I am your host, Jessica Rich, and I am super excited to have my guest, Soneakqua, here today and talk about this topic that I've personally experienced and is really, really important to me. And I think it's important for our community. So, just to remind you all that this podcast is a love letter to my younger self. It's an opportunity to talk about just various topics that I wish I would have discussed with family, friends, or even associates as a kid, as a teenager, in my early 20s, and even my early 30s. This is an opportunity where we can create a safe space. We can shed light on these various topics, and you can hear various perspectives. So, super excited to have Sonequa here. Thank you for joining me.
You are welcome. Thank you so much for having me on.
So let's jump in. Tell us, who is Sonequa? Who are you? Tell us all the wonderful things because you are doing some amazing stuff.
Thank you. Well, my name is Soneakqua White. I am a licensed professional counselor in the states of Texas and Ohio. But there's one group of when I counsel mainly people with anxiety, depression, grief, work-related stress mostly. But when I coach, there's just a specific group of young people that I coach. Those are ages 14 to 22 that are struggling mentally, emotionally, and socially. So those are some of the things that I'm doing right now. I'm also an author, mainly because I like writing content specifically for my clients and some of the issues that they're dealing with. So I have some content out there if anybody wants to check that out.
Okay. So, what led you to be a counselor? We're seeing a spike in having Black therapists and counselors in the mental health space. So, what inspired you to become a counselor?
Well, as a young person, I thought that I was going to be a pediatrician. But the summer before my senior year in high school, my cousin was murdered. She was in a domestic violence situation and could not get out, basically. And that changed my life in a way to when I went to college the next year, I changed my major to psychology because I couldn't help her, but I was like, if I can keep anybody else from going through something like that, that's what I want to do with my life.
Okay. Wow. Talk about um, a very tragic, unfortunate situation, but that inspiring you to help so many people. So you are a woman of faith,
Yes.
and I know that that is important to you on your platform, whether that's social media, YouTube. It is very clear that that is important to you. So, how do you feel about faith in seeking help by a mental health professional? And what I mean by that is, in the Black and Brown community, that there is this perception of not supporting the thought of mental health professionals or seeking assistance. Confidentiality is something I've heard quite a bit. Don't not trusting individuals. But when you think about faith and seeking mental health, what are your thoughts?
I think that we have to because we're not supposed to do life alone. And I feel like if God didn't want there to be therapists or counselors, then He wouldn't have put me through school and got me all the way here. But I think one thing I see, especially in the Black and Brown communities, is that we don't look at mental health and physical health in the same way in which we should. That would help because almost the same way you would go to the doctor, change your diet, move your body, do whatever the doctor tells you to do for diabetes, you would also do something similar if you had a mental health issue. But a lot of the times in the church, we go to the doctor for diabetes, but then we're told to just pray about it if it's something anxiety, depression, or something emotional. And so, what that really does to people is make them feel like they're unseen. And it's hurtful to tell someone to just pray about it. Of course, I think we know what they mean that we should, trust God. But I always tell people that going to seek help doesn't mean you don't trust God. I offer myself as someone to walk with you through your process. until the answers to your prayers have manifested. And so I think if we can put that out there more often, especially coming from the pulpit, that people would understand that it is okay to get whatever kind of help you need. So I think it's important for our faith community to think of it that way.
Have you personally encountered someone who, just did not receive exactly what you said and chose to stand on faith versus seeking assistance?
I think what I've seen is people trying to stand on faith while needing to get the assistance and not doing it because they're thinking, that, like I said, if they go and seek help, then that means they don't trust God and maybe He's not going to heal them because they're not trusting them. But I also ask people, do you know what prayers to pray to manifest the healing that you're looking at? Because a lot of people will just keep repeating, oh God, help me, oh God, help me, oh God, help me. But there are scriptures that tell you what your part is to do to get what you are trying to get. And sometimes, if you want to stand on faith, I will definitely stand on faith with you. I don't consider myself a Christian counselor. I consider myself a Christian who counsels. And to me, that is different. I don't break out the Bible. I don't lay hands on people or anything like that during, sessions. But if you want to take a Christian perspective, I will definitely go there with you. Actually, I prefer it. But if you don't, it doesn't mean I can't treat you because you're not a Christian. And so I just think that we ought to stand on faith, absolutely. But we can also not have to stand on faith alone while we're waiting for that manifestation.
So you made a good point about that you are a Christian who is a counselor. Or I think you may have said you're a counselor who happens to be also a Christian, and you can go there with the client if they absolutely need that. There are some individuals who prefer to go to a counselor, a Christian counselor at church, someone who may not have the medical experience, the study, the expertise, and dedicated the time. Not taking anything away from them, but they haven't dedicated the time and research and put in the work that you have when it comes to specifically the focus on like more of mental health. So for those individuals who prefer to go to someone at the church, what would you say to them, trying to get them to also understand, but highlight more of what you may be able to bring versus someone who's just a counselor at the church?
Well, and I think that that's a good place for them to start. But I think where we also have to work with is the church, the lay counselors, or whatever they're called in specific churches, that when it reaches beyond the point that you're able, then it's okay to refer the person. And we need to make some of those connections so that people know who to refer to. Because sometimes the lay counselors or pastors or ministers will try to do everything with the parishioners and they're wearing themselves out because they're ill equipped. That is not what their specific job is. Now, there are some pastors who were trained as therapists. So you may have that comes into play, but not for the most part. And so, what I would say to somebody who prefers that is to say, there's nothing wrong with you going to the church, but understand there is a limitation and they may need to send you to someone who has the equipment and the training and the tools to help you further.
So I love that you talked about the impact of being ill equipped. I've gone to therapy, and I can only imagine how my therapist felt after our sessions. And then you're talking to what, easily maybe 5 or 6 people a day, depending on the day. And you're having that conversation. I'm sure you all take on some type of load with that, right? You carry that with you, I should better say. And if you
Mhm.
aren't equipped to have those conversations with someone, it could be a lot. Not to take away anything from them, but it could be a lot because they're not trained. So,
Mhm.
what are your recommendations for churches to like reach out and partner with different therapists to be able to provide that support if they don't have that resources on site?
Well, there definitely look at where you are located and find the mental health, whether they're independent or they're agencies. You could even ask, especially depending on the size of your church, you could even ask your members who in the church is a licensed person or knows someone, you can start to make those connections in the communities. And some churches even have their ministries where they may not do counseling, but they have something, some kind of grief recovery, some kind of anger management, where they can start there and then have those particular ministries connect with resources in the community to have maybe even have those people come in on a Wednesday night Bible study or something to let them know, let them see the people who are in their community. Because a lot of times, what we're afraid of is that we see the therapists on TV who look nothing like us. And so we assume that every therapist looks and sounds like the dry eyes guy or or whatever. And nobody wants to go to therapy. They don't even try. So I feel like if we were invited into the church, well, we're actually already there. If there was an open door policy of some sort where they would know who is available, who out there in the community is available, we could make those connections very easily.
I think it's a great advice to start with your members, right? Who's in the church, who's probably more than likely already want to serve or maybe already serving.
Hmm.
So they can pivot to that. I know my church specifically here in Dallas, mental health awareness is huge. And it's something that we talk about often. There's resources that are supported. And I've seen more churches doing that as well online, which I think is great for the pastors who may be struggling with embracing that. What advice would you give them to understand the impact that it could have not only on them but their members in the community?
I would tell some of the pastors to actually look at the statistics, talk to some of their pastor friends who are burning out, who are leaving ministry because they are burnt out. They need counselors. The pastors need counselors too. So do the parishioners, so does the congregation. So if you're worn out trying to handle everybody else's problems, you think that that is your job as the pastor when you could have help and just think of it like that. It's another form of help, of assistance. And I feel like if we made these warm connections where I'm just not going through the phone book. I know that's old, but going to Google or whatever and just picking somebody like shooting a dart, that's harder than if we made these soft or warm connections where the pastors actually went into the community or sent ministers into the community, or again, invited some of these resources into the church to talk to us and pick our brains, let us know where your role really needs to end and our role can pick up. It can be a partnership. Nobody has to carry the full load so that nobody gets burnt out and everybody gets to operate in their gift with excellence.
Yeah, I love that you talked about you working together. Right? It's a collaboration because ultimately, I would assume the goal would be the same for having a healthy community, a healthy member congregation, as well as the pastor. Their mental health, I think, that's so powerful. I've never sat and thought about my pastor's mental health. He preaches on it, right? And I see it
Hmm.
on social media. We're promoting it, but there's
Hmm.
so much that they carry, especially depending on the size of the church and
Right.
how many people you have to connect with. So I love that collaboration and seeing it from that standpoint and everybody leading within their gifts.
Hmm.
So thinking about that as far as collaborating and trying to really help the community be more mentally healthy and bringing more awareness to it, how do you think therapy can help us heal? Well, how do you think therapy and healing can help us break generational patterns?
Oh, that's a good one because we talk about whether you call it a curse, whether you call it dysfunction, whatever is going on in the generations. Um, I think that therapy brings awareness to it because a lot of times, especially in our culture and Black and Brown culture, we do not talk. So we think that keeping it a secret means that nobody's going to get hurt, nobody's going to go to jail, nobody's going to get, whatever. And what happens is because we keep it a secret, it continues down into the next generation and the next. So with therapy, first thing is we're calling attention to it and letting you know that you are not alone. This has happened to other people, and it will continue to happen if you don't heal. You could be the start of the healing process in your generations, in your family. And that's what we want, is to identify, no matter how old you are, no matter how long it's been going on, somebody has to stand up and say, we need to stop it. We can't continue to say, oh, this just happens in my family. Everybody in my family does this. Well, they don't have to. So that's one of the things that therapy addresses. And it's a little in your face, because sometimes people have to be jolted out of things because we think that it's just okay because it's gone through the family. It happened to everybody. Well, it doesn't have to, and it shouldn't. So that's a huge thing that therapy does. And for the healing process, there's two different things that you think about in healing. We know that in Christ, there is true healing. Sometimes with just therapy, we can get to a place where we can manage it well. That next step in Jesus is true healing. And so we can do that. We can merge those things together to make sure that people do actually have a chance to be healed fully, because we always talk about hurt people, but guess what? Healed people heal people.
That's good. And I love, right, that you brought into therapy and as well as, relying on Jesus to help us, right, with that healing process. It's both, not either
Mhm,
or, but
mhm,
having both. And you mentioned like in families, there's this, you know, you don't say anything or you keep it within this household, like you're silent on some things. And that
mhm.
happens in church as well, right?
Yes.
We keep things within the church, or you're not supposed to share. And I know as a child, I personally saw, some things that happened at church that I strongly believe created church hurt for
Mhm.
those around me, whether that was within my family or, at that time, friends. So, how can therapy help with addressing church hurt, especially for those believers who have been pulled away because of it?
Yeah. Well, in therapy, what I'll go from my perspective, because what I would tell people is it wasn't God, it wasn't the church that hurt you. It was a person in the church who was also hurting. And so we have to remember that when we come into any place, especially the church, is not going to be perfect. Everybody's not going to be perfect in that place. So with therapy, you have to realize, okay, we're dealing with people. And so can we address the people? Can we address the situation? A lot of times what happens is because we don't talk, we get hurt in the church or wherever, and we just run from the church. The people that may have needed to know what was going on never knew. They just all of a sudden looked up a year later and you weren't there and they don't know what happened. So, and that's not always the case. Sometimes people do try to talk about it and it snowballs and things happen. But that's the first thing that with therapy that we try to do is make sure that we understand we are dealing with people. And I don't know how deep we want to get here, but I always tell people that there is no neutral party when you're dealing with the world in general, but we live in a spiritual realm as well, even though you can't see it. There's only light or dark, there is no neutral. So if you don't choose light, you default to dark. And a lot of times that is what is happening. And we don't know what kind of things people are bringing into the church. People are coming in to get help, but they're bringing things in with them that are already problematic in the world, and then they bring the problem into the church. And again, if we don't have equipped people to spot this, to see this, to figure out what help they need, then we end up with the church hurt. We end up losing people from the faith, or at least out of relationship and fellowship. So there's a lot that needs to be done, but it can be done, and therapy it can be a big part of this.
I love that you talked about one realizing that we're dealing with people, right? And everyone is not going to be perfect. I do, you know, even at for pastors, right? We hold them to a different standard and a level, but at
Mhm.
the end of the day, they are still human, right? It's a
Mhm.
person. Um, but being able to separate that, so whatever that person may not be a pastor, but whoever that person is, doesn't pull us away, and being able to identify that. So I love you discussed that therapy can help you do that. But then also the reality is there are so many people that have come from different walks of life that entered the church. And
Mhm.
you made a good point. That we're carrying so much, some more than others, some more problematic than others, some more
Mhm.
dramatic than others. And not only can it affect one individual, it could have a domino effect depending on the
Mhm.
situation. So, just going back to what you said, making sure that you have the proper resources available or knowing how to bring them in to provide support to the church, because also, there's a domino effect that can happen. And maybe there are resources that need to be available to bring the church back together depending on the situation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because there can be unification, but it's intentional. So we can't just leave people out there to flounder, and we can't force them back into the church. But I always tell people that I am working with, repair your relationship with God and allow him to repair your relationship with the people, because you don't want to not be in fellowship. Sure, you can pray and everything at home, and people do, but the fellowship with the saints is something that we really need to build each other up. And so we have to think about this in all senses. It's so easy to fall out with someone because everybody didn't understand the other person's perspective. And so that's something that therapy can do too, with not just one person, is be a neutral party to maybe bridge that gap.
So outside of therapy, is there anything else that you can think of or recommend for those individuals who have experienced some type of church hurt and are trying to work through it? Anything else that you would recommend?
I would probably recommend first looking at, now this takes some work, so this could still involve therapy, but taking a look at really what really happened. Because sometimes when you back out of a situation, you're removed from it, you can see things a little bit more clearly. So be honest with yourself in looking at, okay, what really happened? Is there something that I could have done that I could still do now to repair this relationship, especially if I want to go back to that particular church, or even if I want to go to a church in general? Another thing is that I would recommend in the church is, okay, finding a ministry, women's ministry, men's ministry, marriage ministry, whatever it is, to just get reconnected, to see if whatever that issue was that you had before, if it's the same thing at another church, if it's the same thing with these particular people, and so on and so forth. Because sometimes doing something like that will also let you know your part that you played in it. Because if the same thing is happening everywhere you go, guess what the common denominator is? And I know that's hard for some people to look at themselves and see, but I would try going to another church and seeing how you feel in there, seeing if you can get involved, and sometimes opening up and letting people know what has happened to you in the past. I know it's kind of scary because you feel like it might happen again, but sometimes there is healing in just letting people comfort you and letting you know, hey, this is different. You're in a different place now. You're okay. So that's something else that I would recommend.
And I like that you said switching churches. I think that there are some individuals, right, who have been going to the same church for years, right? It could be their childhood church, and
Hmm.
it's a family church that they're just tied to, and it may not be necessarily healthy for them.
Hmm.
What may concern them or what may be unhealthy for them may be the norm for someone else in their family. So I think it's even
Hmm.
good for them to realize, instead of pulling away, find another environment and see if
Hmm.
that will help you, because it's your walk and your journey, and you don't have to, right? Your relationship with God has nothing to do with anybody else. And if you feel like you
Exactly.
need to go somewhere else to be fed and to feel comfortable and for that fellowship, then I absolutely would say to do it, to do
Hmm.
it.
Yeah, because sometimes familiarity, like if you've been in a place for so long and you know all of these people so personally, and there's been all of this stuff, there might need to be a fresh start.
Okay. Yeah, I agree. So you gave us a couple of things earlier about, mental health resources, seeking out, individuals that may be licensed counselors in the church. But is there anything else that you can think of that you haven't discussed on how we can bridge the gap between the church and mental health awareness and supporting it?
I think, things like, how they have like medical, um, what do you call those? When everybody gets together and you can do this assessment and you can do this and meet this person, kind of like a fair, like a resource fair, so to speak. So if you brought in different resources, but included mental health and making sure, like I said earlier, if physical health and mental health is just as important as your physical health as well as your spiritual health. So if we can bridge the gap with all of those things and just letting people know that the resources are there. And I think also, again, coming from the pulpit and coming from the ministerial staff or whoever you have, sometimes when you let people know it's okay to go to therapy or it's okay to do whatever, then people are more inclined to do it because they feel like, okay, someone in authority who they feel hears from God, whether they feel like they do or not. They feel the pastor or whoever hears from God. And if they say it, then maybe it's okay. So I would recommend something like that, like a church putting on kind of a resource fair and inviting the public and letting people know, especially that the church is there if you're looking for members as well, but it also gives you resources in the community and letting people know who's out there, who's available.
Speaking from like hearing it from an authority figure, I think that is powerful. Maybe not everyone at the same level receives it the same, right? Or it may not, I'm going to go regardless. But for
Hmm.
someone else, they may need to hear that,
Hmm.
depending on their upbringing, their current environment, their past environments, them hearing it from that staff, the pastor or the staff, whoever it is, could really, really encourage someone to seek help. And I think that's important for anyone that's in ministry to realize like how you can make a difference and your words matter
Mhm.
about addressing mental health. So when you think about those individuals that may need to hear it from, the pastor or the staff, but what about the individuals who are just struggling in general and are hesitant about speaking to a therapist? It may have crossed their mind, maybe somebody recommended it, but they're not sure. What would you say to them?
I would encourage them to try it. I always tell people that you can interview your therapist just like interview anybody else. And you don't just because you schedule the session and you go to one session, if you're uncomfortable with it, you don't have to keep going to that person. But then I always say, try another person. It doesn't mean that therapy doesn't work because you didn't connect with that person. People have different therapy styles. My therapy style is not the same as the next. So I would always say interview somebody and go until you find someone that you can build a rapport with. If you have EAP through your insurance, that's an amazing way because your company pays for it. You don't even have to pay for the session. So you get to go and try out a couple of people. But I always say as well, do your research. If you're interested in it, find somebody. You can even call your insurance company. You can Google and find somebody who you feel like would match what you think you would be comfortable with. And again, try them out, interview them. There's nobody holding your feet to the fire, and you're not locked in just because you go to one session. So just give it a try. It's probably different than what you think it is. So just see for yourself rather than going by what somebody else thinks or says about their experience.
That's good. And you're right about the EAPs. And I know during the pandemic, and a lot of organizations really took on supporting mental health awareness and having different packages and programs where they paid for a number of sessions. So you got to do your research. And if you're paying for insurance, take advantage of the benefits.
Right.
If it's already included. So earlier I mentioned, thinking about the increase in mental health support needed during the pandemic, but we're also seeing an increase in the demand of the Black and Brown community wanting a therapist that looks like them. And have you felt that? And then also, what do you have to say about the need for the need that we're seeing for Black and brown therapists and counselors as well?
Yeah, I actually have seen that because I have people reach out to me all the time now that I live in Ohio and they're trying to find somebody in Texas. And I have a couple of go-to therapists that I love, but they're full. So, yes, there is a heavy need for more Black and Brown therapists because now people are starting to understand that therapy is okay and just you can go. It's okay to go, but they do want people that look like them so that they could feel like they relate better. The rapport is built a little bit better and faster. But I think some of the things that are happening, just, oh my goodness, we could go down a rabbit hole with this, but what's going on in the world right now in our country. Yes, we have come out of the pandemic, but now we're in the era of PTSD from the pandemic. People are still struggling, trying to get themselves back together. A lot of people's lives have completely changed, and there is a new normal. There is no going back. And so people have to settle with that and renormalize and make things different. So I think a lot of people have just realized, hey, with being home for 2 or 3 years, all this anxiety has built up. I went into a depressive state. I was traumatized by X, Y, and Z. Loved ones died. And, so yes, the pandemic is over in a sense, but we're still dealing with the backlash from it. And I think just a lot of people are realizing that they need help because they're not functioning well. They're not able to do the things that they used to do. And then again, if you look at just what's going on in society, it's scary. So people are just dealing with so much that they realize now that, yeah, I need to talk to somebody.
I think a lot of us don't realize how much the pandemic affected us.
Hmm.
Working from home, there are some people who have already been remote. So for them, it
Hmm.
was like, this is nothing. But even me being a remote employee for the most part, but I traveled a lot throughout the country. I was working in a hotel room at one point all
Hmm.
day. So I wasn't home and I was working 12 hours at a hotel room, and mentally it started to mess with me. And then I saw
Hmm.
it started to affect my folks, and I'm like, "Hey, we're going to all commit that on lunch, we're going to go outside, take a walk." I found a park. But I also I see now I put myself almost in isolation. Like I can stay in the house all day and never leave.
Yes.
And it has so even a person who is huge on self-care, I'm aware that that is not healthy for me and the impact that it has had on me. So I have even basically said, "You know what? I don't have to go in the office this week, but I've gone just to change up the scenery because I know that's what I need for myself mentally." So I think it's good that you said that we are still dealing with that though. It's quote unquote
Yes.
over,
Yes.
but it's not over for a lot of people.
Yes, and I think we have to realize as well that for a bit there, we really didn't go outside at all because we didn't know what this thing was. And so then you develop vitamin D deficiencies or different things that could happen that will affect you physically and emotionally, which people are sometimes unaware of. So there's a lot of reasons why I always say get just like you have an annual physical, I believe that people should have an annual mental health check-in just to see if you're operating at your optimal place. Are you at your baseline? Is this your typical operation? Or is something a little bit off? And sometimes you can't tell right away because you're just pushing through. But if you had someone basically in your back pocket that knows, no, your baseline is this. You should be able to do X, Y, and Z. And right now you're not doing it because you have someone who kind of knows you in that way. And so that's something that I suggest that people start doing.
Yeah, that's good. So you have just shared a lot with us. I know that we were both excited and passionate about this topic because we both are Christians and both support mental health and want our community to do well and
Yes.
excel and succeed. So this is one of my favorite questions of the podcast. But if you could have a conversation with your younger self, what would you say to her?
I would say not to be so serious. Have fun, be more spontaneous. I was a serious kid. I guess that was just my personality. So I was always thinking and, just always in tune with different things. So I would tell myself to not take things so serious. There's a time to be that way, but also give yourself some time to play and have fun. Even in my fun, I was serious because I was competitive about things. So I would just tell myself, allow yourself to be a little bit more free. Allow yourself to relax, have fun, be a kid. And then when it's time for you to hit these other milestones, you'll be there.
I can enjoy it. I think there were some moments I was really serious as a kid. Um, and I think some of it came for me is like I felt like I had to execute these goals, just setting these
Yes,
expectations for myself. So that's interesting that you would have that conversation like enjoy it. Just have fun. Just have fun.
yes. I was I,
So
I
Sanique,
was a checklist person even as a kid. Like, got a next goal, next goal.
yeah. Well, you know what? I think so thinking about you working with children and you experiencing that as a child, how does that affect the way you interact with your clients? Because you work with younger people.
Yeah. It does because I can see that in there. These generations are so serious, but I think it's because they're inundated with information because of how social media is now that I didn't have as a kid. And so they're not shielded from anything. They're even if their parents are trying to keep things from them, when they get out of the house, they know things. So I also have them just you're a young person. I know you're ready to grow up. Have these conversations with you're going to grow up, but we need to make sure that you're able to have this time while you're young to do the things that you want to do because when you grow up, you're going to have a lot of responsibilities. And I talk to them like that, that most of your years are grown up years. So enjoy the time that you are a young person. I know you want to do what you want to do. And listen, if you can do that within a foundation of what your parents are asking from you, I guarantee you'll get more of what you would like to do too, rather than bumping heads with them. So I do come from a different perspective with them, wanting them to take advantage of being a young person because they're going to grow up and then life just gets even more serious when that happens.
No turning back. When you're grown, you're grown. So that is
Yes.
that's great advice. Well, is there anything else that you would like to share with us that you did not get an opportunity to share earlier?
I think I shared everything. I think my heart is just for people to get what you need. I don't care what you've grown up with, who said what, who didn't say what. It is time for you because once you become an adult, you get to make the choices. Maybe you couldn't as a young person. Maybe all the choices were made for you, but now that you're an adult, if you are still hurting, get the help you need because the hurt doesn't just go away because you age. You can see that now. If you're in your 30s, 40s, and 50s and you're still hurting, it doesn't go away with age. So be intentional about getting the help you need, and it's not going to hurt you. It is not going to make you less than. It's not going to make you weak. And God is not going to be angry with you because you get help.
I love that. You was given he gave you this gift to help others, so I love it. Well, Saniqua, how can people connect with you? Like if they have been touched today by what you shared, how can they connect with you, platform, website? Please share.
Absolutely. My website is my name, sonequajwhite.com. All of my social medias are the same, Sonequa J. White. So you can find me anywhere. If you go through my website, you can email me, you can call me, you can schedule an appointment with me as well. So that's probably the best way. But if you just want to check me out, you can go to my social medias and they're all my name.
And I will say she uploads a lot of resources and content. She is consistent. So if if you want to connect with her, of course, but there is a lot of good content on her platform where she's sharing in addition to your books, but there's just a wealth of knowledge on her platform that you can get if you want to continue hearing her wisdom and her perspective from today. So Saniqua, I appreciate you joining me. It was an honor to have you, for you to share and just be in the place tonight. So thank you.
You're welcome and thank you.